one person, Mingitsu is on board. Dr. Simgan,
Yeah. Oh, hi. I'm not part of the panelists, but my name is Mingstu. I am the program director for the Hennepin Health and Minneapolis Heart Institute and Abbott Northwestern Hospital Fellowship Program. I'm originally from Ethiopia. I did my residency in internal medicine there, and I came here in 2004 at Hennepin. I did my internal medicine residency again. After 3 years, I went to Michigan, and after I did my fellowship, I came back, and I have been here for the last, I think, since 2010, and I have been part of the fellowship program since its inception, and as a program director for the last 3 years. And I'm very happy to be here. I'm not part of the panelists, but I'm very glad to be and be involved and discuss with the panelists.
no, you're on the panel now. Sorry. Sorry about that. No, this is great. I love it. Let's jump in to the topics then, since we're all here. And there's some pictures. First question was, back up, looking for a position. And I just wanted to, instead of listing the questions out, I'm going to ask people, and maybe Jane, if I could start with you, when working with the fellows in having them define work career they're going to go into, obviously that's a personal choice, but what are some of the, when they look at going into academics versus private practice versus a sort of a hybrid position, any words of advice?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I just think I don't know if I can offer that much. I think the fellows these days are so savvy about everything, but I do think that most of the fellows realize that there is not such a clear-cut division anymore, I think, between academic and private practice. And I think the positions are very fluid. I mean, you have a lot of clinical people right in academics, and then you have a lot of great clinical research people in private practice. And so it's not as clear of a division, I think, as it used to be. And I really think that they just need to figure out what kind of environment they want to be in, how much time that they want to spend on what they want to do. Do they want to spend a lot of time on research or clinical research and collaborating with other people and other divisions? Or do they just want to do patients care, not very much working with trainees? Because, you know, to be honest, working with trainees does take your time. And for people in the invasive field, sometimes they just are not into working with trainees because they like to actually do the procedures themselves. And so figure out what it is that you like to do. And then we could find a job for you to tailor to that, I think, rather than thinking of in the box, like I want to do academics, I want to do private practice. I think you can sort of figure out the type of life that you want and probably can find something to fit into that mold.
That's really helpful. Gautam, do you agree? I mean, what kind of advice do you offer your fellows that are coming through the program?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with what Jane said in terms of the demarcation between a truly academic place and not is grayer by the day. I came in, speaking from personal experience, came in search of the academic trifecta, you know, with excellent clinical care, but also the ability to partake in clinical research and teach the next generation of trainees at all levels. And I noticed that it's not necessary for somebody to be at Hennepin Healthcare or at the university to be able to pursue the academic trifecta anymore. But knowing your North Star and knowing exactly what drives you and what you'd be excited about waking up in the morning to pursue on any given day, I think that is key. And I couldn't agree more with what Jane said. I think that the fellows currently are so savvy with what they want, and they recognize it early, and are very diligent about pursuing it. So that's what I would add, but happy to take any questions.
Mike, what do you think at Mayo Clinic when you're working with the fellows there?
Yeah, I think Jane was spot on. I think you have to sort of look at a job in the context of your entire life and figure out how the job is going to fit into the life. Because, when we think about, burnout and wellness and all that, it's not just one facet of things, and the job certainly plays into it, but you need to be content with everything going on around you, and try to find a job that you can mold into something that fits your long-term vision. I wouldn't necessarily take a job for what it is at that particular point in time, but when you think about taking a job, take a job for what you think you can make it into over the next 3 to 5 years. Go to a place where there's opportunities to grow in the way that you see fit, where you're working with people that you want to be around and that are aligned with your values. And whether it's private practice or whether it's academia or whether it's traditional hybrid model, I think that's less important. I think that stuff sort of works itself out based on fellows and the vision that they pursue. As the other panelists have said, the lines are becoming more and more blurred, so I wouldn't get too hung up on that distinction.
That's great. Thanks, Mike. Katie, I know you mentioned doing research up in Essentia. Do you find that you have you're given time for that, and that's kind of allocated for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think I want to just emphasize, I think Minnesota is a unique place in that we have a number of health systems, Bill and Mike, are in we're private practice sort of groups that do a lot of academic research. So Essentia Health has the Essentia Institute for Rural Health. I've been able to write grants, and I just submitted my first R01. It'll be scored next month. I've written career development awards. It's different, right? I'm 80% clinical, 20% research. So I get 1 day a week to kind of oversee all of our clinical trials. I'm PI for about currently enrolling in about a half dozen studies and then a couple health system research projects. So it's busy. It's very busy. I don't have nearly the protected time that I would have, I think, in a more traditional academic environment. But I struggled when I was coming out of fellowship. My mentor was not getting funded. And if you don't have a well-funded mentor, it's very difficult to get a K award or get that 75% protected time. And so that's when I started exploring other options besides the kind of traditional academic track, and was able to, look at a couple different kind of more non-traditional research positions where I can still do a lot of clinical research and be primary investigator at our site. And a lot of studies are moving more toward these pragmatic and multi-site collaborations where they need people who are well-trained in research to lead and be able to recruit for that site.
Is that true, Bill? I see you shaking your head.
I believe it's true. So full disclosure, Dr. Chen was my resident as a medical student and my fellow, my attending as an electrophysiology fellow. So I'm incapable of disagreeing with her. That being said, she hit it out of the park as usual in describing this blurred lines now. That is a great thing. That's makes more options available to people. And I think the only thing I'd add to Katie and everyone's great comments would be that your interests and your life goals are likely to evolve. Maybe not change, that might be a strong word, but evolve. And as they evolve, it's really important to pick an opportunity as your first step that's broad and has a lot of options to allow your interests to evolve. And so There are some programs that may promise exactly what you want today, but may not offer all the options that you may evolve to tomorrow. And so I think luckily, as Katie said nicely, and Guantam, Minnesota is a wonderful place that we have all organizations that allow that breadth of options for people. So open-mindedness would be the only thing I'd add. And luckily we have that in our options here.
Well, and I think you have to ask for it. I think there's an assumption that if you're going to a private practice, you want to be all clinical and want to, and there's a lot of opportunities for quality improvement and other ways to get involved, advocacy, policy, research, I think at all of our hospital systems nowadays.
That's so true. Sunny, what do you think over at Regions?
Yeah, hard to add anything to what's already been said, but what I would say is, I think if the question is moving towards, I think it's no longer a question of academic versus private, as opposed to, are you very clear that academics or research or teaching are the focus versus the rest of the spectrum? Because a lot of places offer some degree of the rest of the spectrum. And then if you happen to be somebody who wants to spend a lot of time in research, then you have to bring a credential set or a background that tells a group that, yes, they should be willing to give you some kind of a situation where they benefit from your clinical work, but you get the time and the resources for your research work. I think that's the main challenge. When I look back at the folks we've tried to recruit recently and where we've had challenges is letting folks know that it can be hard early on in a group if you don't immediately meet the requirements they have. If, for example, you're very clinically short right now, it's going to be hard to incorporate a 20 or 30 or 40% protected time for research right away. But you have to make it clear that you've got grants, you've got a background, and try to make a case for how that benefits the group or the institution you're working with, and then try and get what you want. But I think the binary is no longer academic versus private. It's pure academic versus some degree of practice, clinical practice plus research or teaching.
So, Randy, you're up at Mercy. How do you work research in with your practice?
Well, we have a fair amount of clinical research. We have about 10 or 12 studies ongoing. I think what's been said is really good. I think the comment that Mike made, that you have to be honest with yourself as to what your life goals and how you want to work are. You have, when you look for a job. But that said, I think you should be prepared that you can change your job. I mean, and I think that's more true today than it was 15 or 20 years ago. So it's not a life sentence to take a job. So you have to look at where your opportunities are and go for what you think's best at the time. And what Bill said is true. You're going to evolve. It may work out for you to stay where you are forever, but it may not. In terms of clinical research, I think it's available a lot of places. But I would say what Sunny says is that, if it's a really busy program and they're shorthanded, you may not be given the time to do the work, and you may find, because you have other life challenges, family, that you just can't do all that. And so you end up doing just clinical work and getting the work done. So I think if you're going to look at a job that you want to do clinical, you need to look at who in the practice is doing clinical research. Are they shorthanded? Does the person who's heading up really want help, right? Because then they'll use you. Or do they not really need your help, and they're going to, and it's hard to negotiate, but, in the beginning, say, well, I want 20% time to do clinical research. That's hard in private practice to come out of the blocks like that. You kind of evolve into that. So I think you have to be realistic. If you're not in an academic center, in many places, clinical research comes with you making your way on your own time. That means you do all your clinical work, and then at the end of the day, at night, whatever, you fill in your clinical research. And it doesn't have to be that way, shouldn't be that way, but that's the way it is in a lot of places. So you should be wide-eyed, towards the groups you're looking at around the country, that whether they can really deliver that or not. because if you're not an academic center, they're most likely hiring you because they have a clinical need that's not being met. And, you know, I don't know in most places, but people just start out and they're booked, they're full. I mean, I don't know, it's not like cardiologists come to a practice in the first 6 months to a year, they're kind of slow because there's not that much business and they have to grow it. That just does not happen. I mean, it's like you're thrown to the wolves. At least that's my experience. I don't know, Bill, you can tell me if the people coming in Minneapolis Heart have a year or two to, you know, get their speed up. But I bet they're pretty darn busy right out of the block.
Yeah, Randy, these are all great points. You know, I think it depends. A busy, yes. I think there's this balance between pursuing your professional or academic goals, like Katie, you know, with your R01, and then learning your craft. And so, you know, it depends on the person, it depends on the setting. Sometimes we're not big fans of someone coming out and getting 50% protected research time when they still need to learn how to put a pacemaker in. And so there's this balance, and it depends, I guess it would depend on the person. But yeah, when you come out, I think in most of our practices, you're going to feel pretty busy, and probably a good thing. You need to learn your craft.
But I guess what I would say is in most groups that are not a quote, a pure academic institution, when you get hired, you probably don't have those cards that you can lay down that say, hey, I'm going to be 20% protected to start doing research as a neophyte in the group. That's unlikely to happen in most places. You're going to have to earn that. It's going to take some time. Whereas in an academic institution, they may be funneling you into your academic interest right away. I mean, there is a difference. There's a difference.
I agree, Randy. We have that option, but it's typically exercised by someone mid-career coming to us, not as a fellow.
I think, there at Hennepin County, do you find that you're given somewhere to come on board there? Would they be given some allotted research time, or is it more a balance?
I think it's kind of a balance. You know, as I think all the statements that have been said is correct. As an academician in programs like Hennepin, if you bring your own, fund and research, you will be given enough time. But initially, as a new recruit, you're going to be doing more clinical work. But along the way, if there is a way you can bring on, funds that will cover your FTE, you will definitely get some time. Not more than 20%, but up to 20% is, I think, something I have had myself experiencing. Dr. Shroff, you can comment on this, but I think it all depends on the balance between your clinical duties and the FTEs that you can cover based on the funds available from the research.
Yeah, I second what Mengitsu said. I think that sometimes there's a notion that academic practices are able to afford 20% protected time without any funding available, and that's becoming increasingly difficult as well. So I think that most academic places will try their best, including us, to try to get somebody who's really interested in academics, particularly research, to have some protected time. But the pressures of productivity, I don't think that any organization at this point is immune to that. And so I think that for the fellows to be aware of exactly what you're looking for and be able to, as someone said, be able to emulate a roadmap that somebody might have taken along the way to see how feasible it is, I think that that's really critical. There are certain parts of academics, though, that, for example, education, that is inbuilt into our role, for example, at Hennepin Healthcare, where everything we do is related to education, and we work with multiple generations of trainees in multiple different settings, whether it's residents or medical students or fellows. So if teaching or mentorship and education is your forte, and that's the part of academics that appeals most to you, that can be naturally inbuilt into practice. Research is increasingly difficult without funding. Thanks.
That's a great point. I want to bring on another question for, maybe Jane can answer this one. Mentorship, not just a mentor in your own program as a fellow looking for someone to help you find a job, but also should you be asking your mentor to find a mentor at the place you might be going?
Yeah, so I get asked that question quite a bit. We just finished our rounds of interviewing for fellowship applicants for next year. So everybody wants to know how we do this. And I think mentorship is absolutely important, but I think assigning people to mentors is artificial. And I don't think that really works out very well, because a mentor doesn't really need to do exactly what you do. It's just somebody that you feel a connection with. So you can be an EP and you have a mentor who's an imaging person because you like their philosophy of their approach to their work and their life. And so I really do feel that this is a very personal type of thing, but absolutely necessary. And I think it is crucial for anybody who's coming out of practice to have a mentor. And that's why I think people going out from fellowship to try to do their own practice, and some of the fellows do ask me about that. They have their own practice where they're in a small town where like they're the only interventional cardiologist or they're the only EP. I think that's really challenging to do when you come out of fellowship. And I think it's particularly challenging if you do an invasive procedure. When you're an invasive cardiologist, what you need to do is you need to do as many procedures as possible, and you need to have somebody there who's got your back, because you're going to have complications and you have to learn how to go through that. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to do your job. And it's really, really hard to be isolated on your own and have something bad happen and there's nobody to back you up. That's really demoralizing and could really derail the rest of your career potentially. So I think it's absolutely important. Don't hesitate to know everybody in your group, to ask for help, to ask if somebody knows somebody so you can connect them together. I tell my fellows and the fellows who are incoming, if you can't find somebody, let me know what you're interested in. Give me a few weeks after you're here. I know you, I know all the faculty members here. I know a lot of people in town that's not with the university, and I can connect you with somebody that I think on a personality level, you might be able to enjoy having a mentor on. So definitely absolutely important.
Carmelo, can I ask one question in that line?
Please.
I think one of the challenges that we have with our fellows is, we're fortunate that we have a maximum flexibility during training and during their third years. Some fellows want to do 6 months of EP, some want to do additional structural months for structural echo to assist in procedure. The big issue is how to choose and mix and match this skill to the need in the community. Sometimes job may be available in Essentia or some other center. How do we know? How do we train our fellows? Cardiology is so broad that you can actually customize training to a certain area. How do we do that? And the question is, I'm forwarding this question to leadership. How can we talk to you guys to train our fellows to meet your needs? Should we train our fellows to do more echo plus structural or more MRI or more cardiac? We can mix and match, but I don't want us to have fellows which are all the same, painted with the same way. 6 months of echo, 4 months of nuke. I don't think that's the best way to train. We give our fellows maximum flexibility. How do we do that? What's the best way?
Randy, maybe you can comment on this. If you're in private practice, do you want a fellow who can read CT, MR, nuke, echo, boarded and all of that? Or would you prefer to have a fellow that you could talk with early in their career and sculpt them to maybe find someone who might want to have a good fit with you with areas that your group needs?
That's a great question, because what I've, you know, over the time of my practice, how cardiology has changed is that there are subspecialties upon subspecialties, and that requires expertise. There's more boards, there's more training, and people who do interventional cardiology, they really like doing it. They don't really want to share cases, and they get a little upset when they find out that their time in the cath lab just dropped 10%. And the same's true of echo and CT readers. They like it. And so when a practice wants to hire, it's amazing how the little fiefdoms come out, and the CT guys go, well, we don't really need another CT reader, or we don't really need another. I think echo's ubiquitous. I mean, if you can't read an echo, it's hard to take call in cardiology. But I think CT, MRI, those are really popular areas, and they should be, because they're fantastic technologies. And I think, I don't know, I think I wouldn't groom myself for a particular job. I would follow my heart. And if you want to be an MR reader or a CT, you should go for it. You should get boarded. And if that's what you want to do, that's what you need to do. But you should ask the practice whether, if you come there, are you going to get a role? Are you going to get reading time? Because you don't want to invest in CT and then find out that, well, maybe in a couple of years we will have enough CT for you to read also. Because that would be a non-starter for me. But that's getting more difficult. It is. People, the lines are getting drawn a lot tighter, and everybody wants volume. At least it's that way in our practice. And they do a lot, and we have a lot of readers. It's not exclusive, but it's an issue. So, but I think more important than that is what you want. You should do what you want. If you want to be an MRR person, you should go get the training and do it. And then you're going to have to find a job.
One thing I want to ask, sometimes people are offered some things, and then they get there, and then they find out the rest of the crew, the rest of the partners didn't know that, or they weren't quite aligned. How can a fellow, would you suggest to a fellow to prevent something like that from happening at the get-go when they're looking for a position, looking at a job? Let's see, Bill, what do you think?
That's a tough one. Let me just back up just a minute, Carmela, and just comment on the mentor question. I think mentorship is a two-way street. And there are some people, it's like coaching, professional coaching. I'm a big fan, but you have to want it and want to be open-minded to change and be taught. And so we assign everybody a mentor, and it works sometimes and it works other times. And so I would embrace mentorship. When you finish your fellowship, everyone online has been incredibly well trained and taught. And everyone here, I've never met a fellow or an attending cardiologist at any level that's fully trained, that hasn't been humbled by their last case or their last procedure. So we have to be open-minded, and that's what I would really implore all of us, and especially the fellows, to take in mind. I think from Randy's point, the subspecialty specialization, I'm an electrophysiologist. I finished and wanted to do complex ablations and blah, 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 all these really neat, professionally satisfying things. To this day, the highest priority in my recruiting is someone who has a passion for cardiology and seeing patients. And everything else works out. If you love seeing patients, if you love getting to know them and trying to help them and find a passion in that, you will find a good job, and you will make whatever job you're at actually wonderful. I don't know any practice on the line here that doesn't have an abundance of patients waiting to be seen. And so if you're looking to only read CT or complex MRI or do CTOs or epicardial ablations, that's great, but you'll be the most happiest or successful cardiologist in the practice if you're enthused to go to clinic. So that's my podium speech for fellows and for me, because I love this conference, I love this meeting, and it reminds me of why I became a doctor. So what was your question, Carmela? I forgot it now.
You're doing fine. No, you're doing great. The question was, I think you actually touched on all those areas. We've been mentioned mentorship, as well as if a fellow comes up to you and is looking at a practice and looking at your practice, and wants to make sure he gets the right message, or he understands what they're, one of the issues in, just when I say, okay, what are you going to do? And this is what you're going to do. What you want to do, what you're going to do, are sometimes two different things. And
all the fellows have gone through it already. They've gone through it in their residency interviews and their fellowship interviews, and they've sniffed out the program that makes sense to them. And they've talked to enough people to see that what the program's selling is true. So you need to talk to people. You need to talk to people within your subspecialty or within the practice and say, what was it like for you? And did you get a bait and switch, or did they really give you a mentorship and give you a track that made sense? And so you need to talk to people and ask the right questions. I'd also say, there are practices that are hungry for applicants and hiring people. You might get an offer on day one, come back for a second interview, talk to some more people, talk to their families, go to dinner with their spouses. That's where you kind of get the real feel, possibly, for what it's going to be like to be there.
I have to add to that. I think what Bill said is true, but if you're interviewing, and I can't speak for academics, it may be at a different level, but for most large clinical practices, there'll be a core group of people that are in charge of hiring you, and it could be a small group, and they'll direct you through the process, and you'll interview with them. But somewhere along the line, you'll get to meet a lot of other people, or you should. And if you don't, that's a problem. And when you meet those people and they extend their hand to you and they say, hey, if you got a question, call me, do it. Call all those other people, because you want to hear from other people in the practice, not just the executive committee that's on the hiring spree. And you're looking for consistency, the same line, the culture. If it's some groups like our group, we do go out with the spouses. We take people out, and we actually are interested in the spouse of the person we're trying to hire, because that tells us a lot. If they're from Southern Florida, we're a little worried that they're going to stick around. But you should take advantage of, when you're on the interview, you should be meeting a lot of different people in the group. And if they extend their card or tell you to call, do it and talk to all of them, because you'll get a better feel. I don't think people do the bait and switch, but I think it's sometimes hard to really know what you're getting into. And it's the same thing what Bill said when you go to fellowship. You do the best you can, but you don't really know.
Mike, at Mayo Clinic, where when they're looking for people, is it? I know there are different facets of Mayo Clinic. There's so many different places you can fit in. Do they sort of push people in one direction or another, or is it sort of a mutual direction when finding a position that they enjoy to do?
I think Mayo is relatively unique in that we tend to hire a lot from within. People do come from outside, but it's usually to fill a specific niche in the practice. So I think people that are being looked at for positions are generally sort of molded to fit the needs molded within their interests to fit the needs of the practice at the time that they would be finishing. But I would absolutely echo what Bill said about sort of doing what you enjoy doing and doing what engages you. Because one thing I found over the years is, you may not necessarily have a single passion, but passion is going to follow engagement. And if you can find something that you can be thoroughly engaged in, you're going to develop a passion about it, and it's going to be a passion for the rest of your career. Think back to how all of you all felt as third-year med students when you felt really engaged seeing patients. I think if you can capture that, rekindle some of that passion for just going to clinic, rounding in the hospital, seeing patients, as Bill said, that's going to serve everyone quite well, regardless of the group, regardless of the needs, regardless of the demand at that particular point in time.
Excellent, thanks. Katie, can I ask you, what were some of the red flags when you were looking around at places to go to that helped you guide you towards this venture?
Great, thanks for asking. I mean, for me, it was really important to be at a group that had other female cardiologists, honestly. Women make up a small percentage of cardiologists. I think maybe Jane probably could quote this, 14% or so. And so I wanted to be at a group that I felt supported and, that there were other women who were kind of in my similar situation and that I could talk to. So that was a big factor for me. And the other thing was someone was asking about family, and I think it's really important for me to be able to be involved in my kids' activities. I coach youth soccer. I'm a den leader for Cub Scouts. I go to my PTA meetings today, and parent teacher conferences. I mean, I wanted to be in a place where I could still be involved and be able to have some flexibility, people who are going to cover for me, so that I could do those things. So that, to me, if there were some places that the schedule was very inflexible. There was, the call schedule would be made a year in advance, and there wasn't ability to be able to change that. That to me was concerning for those reasons.
That's very helpful. Sunny, what did you? What are, from one of your standpoints, what's any red flags that you can think of that would be an issue for fellows to be aware of?
For sure. But before that, I wanted to say one thing really quick, which is finding a job that you like is a challenge, but the bigger challenge is staying in the first job you get into, because sometimes it's not what they sold you, or it's not what makes you happy. So I really do think mentorship in your first position is really important. To Jane's point, mentorship has to be organic. You can't be assigned somebody that has exactly the same skill set or came from the same university, but ultimately you need to find somebody in your new practice, your first practice, who can very authentically have a discussion with you on the culture of the new practice. It can't always be the chair or the president or the CEO or whatever he or she is called, because they often will have to have crucial conversations with you on expectations and stuff, and it gets a little formal. But I think finding someone in new practice who you feel you can quickly, you vibe with, and they can give you an idea of what the expectations are, what the tone is, how people interact, is really, really important to success in your first job. Because I don't know the statistics for cardiology, but I do know for internal medicine, I think about 60% of folks change their first job within 3 years. And that's okay. I mean, I'm not in my first job, I'm in my second job, and I'm super happy here. But most people would want to not change jobs unless they have to. But talking about red flags, I think it's really important when you interview somewhere to ask why they're looking for someone new. Is it a growth in the program? Is it a skill set they need? Or are they replacing folks who have left? And if it's replacing folks who have left, why did they leave? If folks left because they retired, or folks left because they want to go somewhere to a warmer climate, or move abroad, or got some phenomenal position that is unbelievable, that's one thing. But if a group tells you that they had 5 or 6 people leave in the last 1 year, and they have no more comments on what happened, you should be a little bit more curious about what happened. The challenge is they may not tell you what happened. And that's why I made a comment in the chat. I was like, even if you meet with a select group of people who you interview with, and there's no opportunity on your itinerary to walk around campus, ask and say, hey, I'm going to be doing a lot of inpatient work. Can I walk around the inpatient units? Or I'm going to be on if you're echo readers or CT readers, or MRI, can I walk around and just kind of see? You will learn a lot from non-verbal communication by looking at people, seeing how they sound, seeing how engaged they are, that you may not learn from just asking questions with the interview group. So always ask, why did the last 2 or 3 people leave? And see how easily they can give you an honest and full answer.
That's really helpful. I agree with that. I think I've had people pull me aside and say, call me, or sit me down and talk to me and be very, very blunt and upfront. And it's always a challenge when looking for a practice. You want to look underneath the carpet and look at all the dirt, and every practice has one. That's just life. But I think we need to kind of, it's fair to also try to get a grasp as a fellow or looking for a place to try to understand what that dirt is and whether it's something that's going to be okay for you. And that's just to accept it. I think that's a fair statement.
Well, I want to just add to what Bill said and about seeing patients in clinic and being engaged and taking care of patients one-on-one. At least in clinical practices, it's just really important that people want to see patients and go to clinic. And it's easy when the people get subspecialized to look away from that. And I think what Bill's trying to say is that, that's not the only reason we're here. We're here to see patients. And if I was a recruit and I was looking at a large practice and I was trying to send a message, the message I'd want them to hear is that, yeah, I read CTs, I'm bored, I'm going to be boarded. Yeah. But, I love seeing patients. I expect to be in clinic and taking care of patients. I'll be honest, that's what a large group of clinical practices, that's what they want to hear. And they don't want to get too bogged down with how much CT reading time you're going to get. If I had to coach somebody through an interview, I would do what Bill just said. I would, if you don't feel that way and you don't really want to see people in clinic practice, you should be asking yourself what you're doing. But if you want to sell yourself in clinical practice, that's the way to sell yourself. There's not a practice on earth that doesn't want to take somebody who's enthusiastic about being in clinic and seeing people. That's my advice.
Well, that's a good point, Randy. And I think everyone has to sort of find their own, as was mentioned earlier, find their own personal goals. And Jane put it saying, you have to do what you want to do. What's your burning desire to do that? And Bill mentioned that also. And it's a balance. I think that's an understanding. And in reality, yes, I agree. Look, it's all about the patient. Always has been about the patient, should be about the patient. But in reality, there is a good chunk of each practice that's going to say, look, there are going to be some people, I don't want to do clinic. I don't want to do the floors. I don't want to do this. And there's a little bit of that. And we all have to understand this. That's just human nature. And everybody wants to have someone come into the practice who says, I want to do clinic. I want to do the floors. But in reality, I think we're just going to be lying to ourselves if we believe that route. And I think we should accept the fact that fellows coming out are going to want to do fun stuff. And I think that they're going to be coming out saying, okay, but where can I find a good fit to get in there? And again, maybe that's going to be up to the fellow. They may say, look, I'm willing to miss out on some good time for training in doing interventional cardiology. I'd rather, I want to get into this practice. That might be a priority for the fellow. Getting that practice is more of a priority than learning my skill set in the first year. And I'm willing to do 3 or 4 days of clinic and a day in the cath lab in that kind of scenario. That's okay. But just, I think it's important that fellows understand what they're getting into. That's the most important thing, because the numbers are high for leaving a job. I don't know. What do you think, Mike?
Yeah, I think it gets to the point of it behooves the fellows, whether it's private practice or academics or some combination thereof, when they're going through the interview process and meeting with the leadership of the group, it's important to get a sense of what the scorecard is. you know, what am I going, how's my promotion going to be judged? How's my path to partnership going to be judged? How's my academic rank going to be judged? Is it RVUs? Is it patient satisfaction scores? Is it distribution of time patients seen? Is it academic productivity? What's actually the scorecard in this group? What matters? And then figure out if that aligns with their values and if that's something they can really focus on for the first 3 to 5 years while they establish themselves until they can mold the job into something that they really want it to be. So I think understanding the scorecard is really important, regardless of the position where fellows are going to end up.
Kamala, this is Bill. Can I just add a comment? There's been a discussion here and some on the chat about kind of the whole person and their family, their spouse, their, you know, what they're all about. I'm not sure if the fellows or, you know, others understand employment law. We're not allowed to ask questions about your family or other aspects. And so if you're comfortable, if you bring it up during the interview, then we can explore your kids, your family, whatever, you as a person, and your personal life. But we can't go there unless you bring it up. I think it's critically important, my personal opinion, that you do bring those things up so that we can explore it, because you're making a potentially life commitment to your, you know, someplace you're going to spend a lot of hours to. And it's really important that you have a match there. But people may not understand that we can't ask legally some of those questions appropriately.
That's a good point.
If it's okay to quickly second that, it gets more and more challenging nowadays with human resources and regulation of the laws. You really have to be careful before you ask. Like, I do not even ask someone if they are married or have children or things like that, or the way they went to medical school, for example. If it's a foreign country, you really have to be really careful. But yes, to Bill's point, or to anybody else's point, you want people to fit in there. And to Kate, like Katie said, many folks want to make sure that it's not just a fit for them personally, it should be a fit for the family. So just make it very clear to them that they should feel comfortable asking questions. If the candidate asks questions, it is always reasonable to answer a question. But you really have to be careful, especially if you work for a large organization, before you ask things about family, children, marital status, faith, country of origin. It's just getting just a little bit more challenging pretty much every day.
But with that said, that would be considered a red flag if you go an interview and they start asking those questions without you mentioning it. Would you agree?
Oftentimes, and Jane can speak to this, I mean, having just gone through this with the fellowship interview process, the same thing applies, right? We can't ask questions unless it's on the application or the candidate brings it up. But oftentimes when those questions get asked by interviewers, whether it's for a fellowship position or a job position, it's not meant to be intentional. It's meant to be friendly, conversational. So I wouldn't run off and hire a lawyer if you get a question about that, but it is something, if you get repeated questions or overly probing questions, that should be a red flag.
Yeah, I agree with that, Mike, because it is a lot of the times we're not supposed to bring it up, but people do because they're friendly and they just want to know about you. Now, what would be a red flag if somebody asks you, are you planning on getting pregnant within the first year of your practice? That's a red flag, and that is not a good thing. And I will walk away from that.
Well, we've been talking a lot about bad things. I want to just, if you were to go back in time and look at a practice that you were looking at, what would be a top green flag? I'm going to start with Gautam. If you could tell us, what would be a top positive thing about a practice that you looked at, other than like your career choice and whatnot, what focused area you're going to be?
You know, I think for me, the culture of the group and the dynamics in the group, we are a relatively small group. We have 20 individuals within our division, but the you do realize, may not realize this as fellows, but you realize this very soon after you start your job, that you spend a lot of time with these individuals on a day-to-day basis. And it's really, really important, as someone said also along the way, to understand how the group dynamics work and to trust your gut in that regard. And so a green flag to me was and would be, the comfort level of the group, the ability to work together, the ability to align with a common purpose, and having a common North Star that the group identifies. I think that would be a huge green flag for me.
Excellent. Jane, what do you think? What would be a green flag for a fellow if they were to come to you with practice?
Well, absolutely. The people that you work with, and it goes for fellows now, and also anybody that's getting a job, you spend more time with your colleagues than you do with your family almost. So you really need to feel that you are very comfortable and that you can find friends. I also think a very important thing is to look at your leader. And that's not trivial. And that may be a little bit more challenging to tease out, but it's really important. I mean, we all do our own things, and most of our time our bosses don't really micromanage, and they let us do it. But I think it's important to look at the characteristics of your leader. Is this somebody who's going to be supportive of his people? Is this somebody who's going to be going to bat for you? Is this somebody who brings people together? Or is this somebody who's divisive? Because some people would be really nice, but then they sort of do little things behind the back and, they're not helping. And if you're not helping, you're actually hurting. And so watch out for the people, or be familiar, I would say, with who's leading this group. Is there a process if the leader is not great? Is there a process to turn over the leader? I mean, it's more challenging in academic world, but it applies to private practice too, because who is going to be leading your group? A lot of groups have a thing where every few years they change the leaders just so they get a little different perspective. And that's actually, I think, is a really great thing. But is there something in process like that for that group? And if it doesn't work out for the leader, is there a way to change that kind of leadership? It's just something to think about, because we all have to answer to somebody. And it's really nice if you have a leader who's supportive.
Steve, you've been quiet the whole time. I'm going to bug you. What do you think would be a green flag for a practice when you're?
So I think for me, Carmelo, it would be that you have a common goal and vision alignment with the people in your group. And Jane, I think you called out that the leader is important and what the leader is like. And I would say in modern health systems, the reality is the head of a cardiology group may not lead in all areas. There are a lot of domains of leadership. There's your cardiology leader is part HR, part hiring, part overseeing competencies, but the autonomy of that position has kind of been reduced over time, especially in larger corporations where your leadership that has big influence on what your department looks like, i.e. your budget, can extend all the way to the top of an organization. So I think it's really important when you look at a group, and in the Twin Cities, for example, are fairly large groups, you need to know who the leadership is, who can influence your local cardiology politics all the way up. And are they really aligned? Can they articulate what the cardiology vision is? And will they back it? And how will they back it? So I think leadership is a kind of an expansive term, but I think a green light would be where they're aligned. They can clearly tell you where they want to go, and they can show you the metrics and the culture to get it there. Along those lines too, I think sharing is important. So if you share common goals and vision, generally I know the groups are different, but reimbursement's going to be shared. I think that's important, because if you have a group that's siloed, where say the interventionalists or EP or other groups are off on their own with their own finances, that's tough. And it's tough because RVUs can be really dense, like they were, for example, when I started cardiology, the nuclear cardiologist was top biller in a group. But in the group I was in, we shared all the revenue. So the excess margin went to perhaps buying EP equipment. And now EP is high, so nukes don't reimburse. So you see, it's really important that you share a vision and you share the revenue. So I think those are green lights that I would look for. And if you're if you're developing cardiologists, giving them some autonomy, helping them bolster their competence and their skill sets, those are the things. But people need to be able to articulate those really well when you talk to them, not just platitudes or fluff. So that would be my close.
No,
I'm going to play the devil's advocate. I agree with what Steve said and a lot of the stuff, but I think it's hard when you're an interviewee to cipher through those layers of levels of control and government in a group. I mean, it's really hard. I would say that it is important to understand how the group is governed and how decisions are made.
Mhm.
And try to get your head around that, because I think all groups have a different model and they can all be good. I think on a real practical standpoint, what a green flag would be is if you interviewed at a place that was extremely organized with your interview and that you met all the people that from your perspective, not theirs, you would want to see. So you met the leadership, you met the HR people, you met the people that might be in cardiologists, you know, you got, they got you to see everybody and talk to a lot of people. That to me would be a green light. It would be a red flag to me if I interviewed at a place and I talked to 2 or 3 cardiologists who were in the hiring and I didn't really get past that. So I just, from a practical standpoint, that's what would be a green flag for me, is that you were really allowed exposure to a lot of different aspects of the group, from nursing, right? Like the nurse manager maybe, to HR, to other cardiologists. But it's going to be hard to figure out the dynamics of control in large corporations.
my understanding is that there's the bulk of private practices have dissolved in the last 10, 15 years. And so we've all heard, I don't know if you heard on NPR with Kaiser and how the nurses are going on strike and the physicians are going to have to start pitching in to fill the gaps. And that may be all of us, to be frank, that just can happen. Is there, I think this kind of turns around to, I want to touch on what Bill touched on earlier and get the opinion of the group. If you're going to go into a practice today and know that, you know, should the fellows be expecting, hey, look, I want to do this and this, I want to be a phenomenal interventionist. But you know what? Should they also be open to say, hey, it's time to, I need to be able to take care of patients, and if my partner needs help, or if they need me to be on the floors, or if they need to be in clinic, I just got to pull up my bootstraps and go in and do it. Is that a consensus amongst everyone that they shouldn't be angry or resentful for a long period of time? Should they expect that kind of a job? Let's see. Mike, you want to go first?
Yeah, I mean, I think people are going to come out with a vision of what they want to do, and I think that's well and good. But you all have to realize that whether you're in an academic or a hybrid or a private setting, you're joining a group practice, and I think the way to ultimately succeed is to make yourself indispensable to that group. Make yourself indispensable and produce really high quality work. Whether it's seeing, and this gets back to the scoreboard question, you know, meet those metrics on the scoreboard, whatever it is, make yourself indispensable. That's going to give you the capital that you need to mold the career into what you want it to be. And this, don't take a job for what it is right then and there. I think getting back to your earlier question, a green flag for me is if you can take a job and say, you know, in 5 years, I can make this job into this, and this is going to be the perfect job for me. That's a big green flag. So look for those opportunities, make yourself indispensable off the bat. It's going to make those opportunities come a lot quicker.
What do you think, Gautam?
I think that I think it'd be fair to say everyone wants a team player. And I think that it would be a huge red flag for me if I sensed in an interviewee that there's going to be a lack of willingness to kind of pitch in and help out the group when necessary. So I think that team player component, I think, is extremely crucial, and I think that it needs to come through on the interview trail. I also, just to follow up on what Dr. Collins said, I think it's really smart to have a niche, develop a niche area that you can probably do better than anyone. And it may not be one of those things that you need a subspecialty fellowship for, but an area that would be critical to the group that you can nurture and view as that would be viewed as a strength by the group. I think that would be smart to do, and I think particularly important for people who are starting off a new job to have that area that they feel passionate about, that they can really relate to and be the expert in for the group. Thanks.
Thanks, Katie. Katie, what do you think? You're got an you're applying for an R01 grant. That's amazing.
So yeah, I mean, I think everyone's hitting, when I looked at different options, you do need to look at that sort of 3 to 5 years, kind of how are you going to be able to build and grow your vision of what you want your job to be. And so the job that I was able to get at Essentia allowed me that flexibility and that time to be able to continue to write grants and to do research. I will say I had a couple of fellows, so I'm 4 years out from fellowship. I had a fellow who did interventional cardiology and took a job in Seattle, and he had to cover STEMI call at 3 hospitals. And he was routinely every night when he was on STEMI call driving around like a crazy person. And he actually stopped doing interventional cardiology and is now just a general cardiologist because it was just too much for him. And so, I mean, he just hated being on call, hated having to do STEMIs because it was just so brutal. And so I think, Minnesota, actually, all these groups are actually very collaborative. I think we're of this sort of group mentality where it's not kind of everyone for themselves, like some of the more traditional, smaller private practice groups that you can find in other states. I had another friend who also took a job and just really, again, it wasn't build what, like people were saying, what they said. This person was a structural interventionalist, was supposed to start a TAVR program, been there for 3 years, and the administration never got the equipment, never got the contracts, to start the TAVR program. And so I think, these are things that are great for them to say, but it'd be better to start at a program that actually is already doing some of that interventional work, if that's, an area that you want to do. But everybody's going to have to do clinic, right? These interventional cardiologists are going to have to do clinic. The structural, heart folks are going to have to do clinic. You can't there's not enough volume to do TAVR every single day for most places. So, in my group, we have one of our female cardiologists loves MRI, and she's building a cardio-oncology sort of niche. She's given talks about it. She's building kind of her own clinic and getting referrals for that. There's another cardiologist who her husband's an endocrinologist, and she's great with cardiometabolic and SGLT2 inhibitors and GLP-1, which we're all having to become more familiar with. I do more prevention. I was thinking about doing CT training, but I realized I could be an order of the CTs and calcium scans. I don't need to read them. I wanted to focus more on echo. I think you can get spread too thin. So I think you do have to kind of think about what is it that you're passionate about, and try to mold that career into, being able to fit that.
Mingitsu, when people are coming in or talking to you about your practice, or what are one of the things that you found that's important or very valuable for doing your work with your partners?
I think people have said kind of touched a number of points. Everybody needs to be indispensable to the group, and the way to be indispensable to the group is to be versatile, to be open, to have the grit and the passion, and not to have silos. I'm doing echo and I'm not gonna do ABC. I don't think it will lead anybody to anywhere. So being versatile. If you look at many programs, even interventional cardiologists are now asked to read echo to pitch in and help the echocardiographer when the volume is too high. So I think the practice, depending on where you go, there are certain, practices where highly specialized skill is needed, and that is enough to keep you going. But in general, being versatile and being able to do multiple tasks and being part of a team would make you indispensable and successful, and I think that will lead to a successful and happy professional life.
Yeah, and just to qualify my comment earlier about being indispensable, I think being indispensable means different things to different groups. So at Mayo, being indispensable is having a niche in complex ablations and being the one that people send, being the physician that people send patients to from all across the country to do complex ablations. That's not going to make you indispensable in all groups. So it means different things to different groups. But again, it gets back to assessing what matters at that group. Does it align with your values? And can you leverage what matters with that group, align it with your values, and to make it into a job that you want it to be?
Bill, I want to ask you, if someone's coming to Alina and you had your listings, if you had someone who did something that no one else could do, and you had a little bit challenging to work with, and you had another person who was very easy to work with coming in board. I know what you're going to say, but I have to ask it just the same. Which one would you pick?
I think we maybe make this more complicated than it is. We've all either played Little League baseball or soccer, or we've all been interns. And the most indispensable person on your team is the person who says yes, and the person that's there and shows up and with a good attitude. And if you've seen one practice, you've seen one practice. So I'm just going to speak for mine. I don't find it challenging to find people that publish 20 papers a year or do really complex procedures. The most indispensable person is the one that accepts being as a part of a team, who I couldn't agree more with Dr. Symposium, the person that's willing to pitch in, even outside of their own comfort level, to help out. And the person that accepts their role there. And so, and we all know this. Somehow we all, and I admit it, we all lose track of that or sight of that, but it gets back to basics. You want someone that is trustworthy, says yes, with a smile on their face. And unfortunately, that's the hardest person to find. Don't mean to be, such a downer here, but again, reflecting back on why we did this in the first place.
A great point. And Jane, when you're working with the fellows, how often does it come around where you have to discuss being positive about your work? Is it a challenge?
You mean to motivate them?
More like, on line of what Bill was talking about, being a team player versus being, because a lot of these people, look, we're all the same way, right? We're all bred to focus in on this one focused area. And now we really do have to be a part, when you go into practice, academics or private practice, be a part of the team and be a team player again.
Yeah, well, that's for sure true. But I think for, we do have subspecialties, and for people who want to do subspecialty, if you're an interventional or you're an EP, I don't know a lot of practices these days that are purely EP. And I'll speak to the EP section just because I know that very well. Everybody wants to have, a lot of people, they just want to have a pure EP job. And I get that question a lot. Where can I find a purely EP job where I don't have to do general cardiology? I don't know that that exists anymore. I mean, we all have to do some general cardiology. But I think it is one of the things, as far as the fellows looking for the job, is to look at the distribution. If you find a job that says, all right, well, we'll let you do 80% EP and 20% general cardiology, that's great. But then if they start to give you 50% general cardiology and that doesn't change, that is a red flag that you should look at that. And that has nothing to do with being helpful. You want to be helpful, but you want to do what you're trained to do, and you want to do what you were contracted to do. And so it's a fine line that you have to pay attention to. So I do think that does matter. But I think Bill is right. It's not that hard to find somebody who's going to do something complex. Somebody out there is going to do it, but it's much harder to find somebody who is willing to help out, who is going to back you up no matter what. And that's the kind of people that we all want to be with. And the other thing I want to talk to about all this, like, should we train the fellows for different practices, or should we do that? I agree with a lot of people who say we shouldn't do it, because you don't know what practice you're going to be in, but you do know what you like to do. And remember, and I tell my fellows this, the fellowship, you don't finish learning everything that you're going to learn about cardiology when you finish your fellowship, when we give you that certificate. That's when your learning starts. All we're doing is we're teaching you how to learn. I'm pretty sure that Bill doesn't do procedures the same way that I taught him, but you figure it out. And so I think that's an important thing to always be aware of, is you want to know what you like to do and how you want to spend your life, but you're willing to learn to do different things. And as Katie had mentioned, you sort of tailor the job to what you would like to do, and give it a chance. I think people who want to change jobs after 6 months, I just say, you don't even know what is going on in your practice. So there's problems in every single practice that you go to. And you will find that out. It's just a matter of whether you can accept those little issues that go on with every practice. In my experience, I think that time is about 2 years. So the last 2 times I've moved, I've given myself 2 years to say, let's just stick it out and see what's going on. In 2 years, you're gonna know whether this is going to work out for you, whether you can be comfortable in there, or whether you can mold that job to do something that you want to do. And that's a good enough time. So give it a little bit of time, give it a chance.
They're all great.
Jane, I still tie my shoes, knock on the door, scrub my hands the way you taught me. So sorry to disagree.
This is some really great points. We're gonna now, we're kind of, I know some people want to cut out at 8 o'clock, and that's understandable. I'm the panelist. I really appreciate your time. We can, if there's no objections, we can go till 8:30. If fellows have any other questions, we can go directly to the fellows, or I have another list of questions. I keep on going with the questions that I have. Any objections to wrapping it up at 8:30? Or you want to, some people have to go now, you can go ahead and go now.
Yeah, I'm gonna need to drop off here. So thank you, everyone. This has been a pleasure. I wish all of the fellows best of luck. Happy to answer any questions that might come up, and good to see all of the panelists again. So thanks again, Carmelo, for leading the show.
Thanks a lot, Mike. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Mike.
Good seeing you, Mike.
Carmelo, I also have to leave before I get fired home. So
Totally understand that. Thank you very much for coming on board. Really appreciate it.
Well, I would open it up to the fellows if they have specific questions rather than.
That sounds great. Does a fellow in the group have a question they want to reach out to us?
Well, there's somebody who's asking, when is a good time to start looking for a job? I think that's a good question, because I get that all the time. And my answer is always now or yesterday. I don't think it's ever too early to start looking for a job. You should, the minute you know what you want to do or where you want to go, you should start asking people about who they know and what practices are out there. And so it's really never too early. And it's hard to look for a job, because I find that asking people, figuring out what you want is a very broad area. I mean, we want a lot of things, right? I can tell you like 10 things I want right now, but that I'm not going to get them. But I think maybe it's more helpful to kind of think it the other way, which is, what is your non-negotiable? What sort of things are you not willing to compromise on? Now, it could be your spouse needs to live in one city and that's non-negotiable, and you want to do what your spouse wants to do. That's your non-negotiable. Accept that and start looking for a job in that place. Or if you want to live in San Diego, the most perfect place to live in this whole world, then do it. But you're not going to be living in a 5,000 square foot mansion, at least not right away. So you can't expect that. So you may have everything you ever want in life, but just not at the same time. So just figure out what is your one non-negotiable right now, and then start from there.
That's great. Yeah. Any other comments on when to start?
Carmelo, I might add that it's whether, and this isn't to make people anxious, but whether they realize it or not, the day you start your fellowship is the day you're kind of being evaluated for positions. And that's a good thing. If you play to your strengths, all the relationships that you make and the people you meet, you leave a positive impression. So even though you may not know you want a job with the person you're talking to, who might be a staff or a co-fellow, they may take a position, or they may be in a hiring position at the institution where you're training and you may want to stay, or you may have a fellow who leaves and go to a practice. And that happens all the time, that people call each other. So you'll be looking for a job, but also jobs start looking for you in kind of a tacit way. So just be aware of that. And the relationships you make are the best insurance, I think, that you can get, that you'll have jobs that are probably readily available to you if people like you. And so I just wanted to add that in. So just be aware it starts day one in fellowship, that you're creating doorways to walk through in the future of future jobs.
Carmelo, if I may add, I think that we in cardiology work with a lot of ancillary staff, and for the fellows to remember that the ancillary staff have a lot to do with the word about you behind your back. And I think that whether you work in the echo lab or the EP lab or the cath lab, I think those relationships, to Dr. Smalley's point, are really, really critical. And when you are out as a fellow, those voices behind your back are actually important to pay attention to. So fostering relations not only with your faculty and your colleagues, but also the nurses you work with and the technicians, it's really, really critical. And we actively take those into account when we're evaluating the fellows, but also when you're looking for a potential partner.
Right. I do have to add a plug for the ACC too, and for Katie Benziger, who's probably responsible for me being with Essentia Health now, which is great. Thank you, Katie. But that's a professional relationship. Actually, I interviewed Katie for one time when she came to Health Partners and Regions, and she chose Essentia, and then down the road, the tables were turned. So Katie was my advocate there. And so that's a good professional story through your professional association. Because that's one thing I would pitch for the ACC tonight, who puts this together too, is it's a house of cardiology. It's 50 states, it's worldwide, it's international. So build your relationships within and without or outside of where you're training, and keep them, because those are dear and precious things to have. I'm thankful for all my friends, many who are on the panels tonight.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough. I think your behavior in your fellowship will follow you, good or bad, wherever you are. So that's just something everyone should remember. And it's not just how you treat your staff that you're with, the nurses, the techs, the salespeople, but also your fellows, your partners that you're going through your fellowship.
It used to be that we could go to meetings together, right? We weren't virtual, and you'd go to ACC meetings and you'd meet people. And if we ever get back to that, I hope we do, I would tell the fellows that don't be afraid to get out there. If you're at the national or even the Minnesota ACC meeting, there are a lot of cardiologists there that are in your neighborhood that you should just go up and introduce yourself. I love that. When I was with, I loved it when fellows would come up at the state ACC meeting and introduce themselves. And, it was I never felt put out by that. And that's the way you make contacts. And if we get back to a world where we can actually see people again, take advantage of those meetings. Don't be afraid to talk to somebody that you recognize or you know the name, and it's in Charlotte, Carolina, where maybe that's the place you need to be, whatever. But don't be afraid.
Is there, Randy, what for a fellow to get on your list to interview, what's a how do they get on your list to be interviewed for a position there?
They call us up. I mean, I think that, we keep a list. We have fellows that contact us, and they may contact me. They may contact somebody they know in the practice. It'll get forward on to people, and then if we're looking, we'll respond to them. If we're not looking, we still respond. And if a practice isn't looking for an interventional cardiologist and that's what you want, I mean, they should be honest with you. But things change. So we keep track of all the names of the people that contact us. So you got to put yourself out there. Can't be afraid.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just going to say, I think a lot of groups don't have necessarily a position posted, but that if you start looking early enough, they will know to kind of fit you in and try to create something if you're the right fit, or they know someone's going to be retiring or, cutting back. So just because there's not an open job posting doesn't mean that you can't email the division chair or section chair.
Great advice.
I just want to add to that. I find that the fellows that we end up interviewing, they often knew somebody specifically. Maybe they trained with them. Maybe somewhere in their career, they knew somebody. So somebody in the group says, "Hey, I know this person." Maybe more than one person. It seems like those life connections, like what Steve was just talking about with Katie. Those are really valuable. So, I always say, when you're having lunch with somebody, don't forget it, because it may be somebody who could hire you in 5 years, right? So you need to keep track of all those acquaintances, and don't be afraid to keep them up to date.
That's great advice. Sunny, what do you think?
What I would say is don't take things personally if things don't work out. The fact that you may or may not be the person that a group hires does not mean that you are not a good enough person for them. It's all about fit. So number one, if you really like a practice or a certain setting, and if it doesn't work out, stay in touch with people. Life constantly changes. The needs of a group constantly changes. So just stay in touch with people. And I'll go back to something a lot of folks kind of hinted at. The literature clearly suggests that, especially in leadership work, your social or emotional intelligence matters much more than your intellectual intelligence. The problem is, as smart as you may think you are, cardiology fellows are by and smart, really, really smart people. And whether they subspecialize or not, whether they have 20 publications or not, they're all really smart people. What people will buy into is your emotional intelligence. If you look like an empathetic, friendly, authentic person, if everybody you met with is like, gosh, he just seems like a nice guy, or she seems like a really nice person, that is going to matter a lot in maybe not your first job, but certainly by the time you settle down somewhere, it's your ability to empathize with people that is going to matter a lot. So don't just be nice with the chief or the CEO or the medical director of the group you interview with. Be nice with every nurse, every exercise physiologist, every sonographer you talk to on the way. Even if they're not formally interviewing you, just be nice with everybody and do so in an authentic way. One of the common screening questions I ask folks, and I decide based on how off guard they're taken, is I'd say, if you've been in a teaching program as a fellow, what would the residents or the medical students say about you? And if you're not, I'd say, what would a nurse say about you? And one of my favorite answers from someone who was stunned by this question was, he thought for a second and said, the nurses would say, I am soft-spoken, I am thoughtful, and I answer pages quickly. And I was like, I will do anything I can to hire you. That matters way more than any qualification you have, because that's a stronger determinator of your long-term longevity in a practice. So just, it's more than being the smartest guy or girl in the group, because it's a bunch of smart people you're competing with.
I think, Bill, they're kind of reiterating a lot of what you were saying too earlier.
Oh, I had a lot of brilliant people as interns and residents on my team as a fellow, that I would never, ever hire. And I had a lot of average people that I would love to be my partner, right? But I agree with everything everyone's saying. It's a common sense approach that I think people are describing. Steve, your experience with Katie is a great one, where I like seeing people early. Jane has sent lots of people our way early, even if we have no need and we never get around to making an offer. It's a small world. Getting to know those folks, you never know when they're going to come around again, or you're going to come around again and make that connection. It's really worth our time to spend having a cup of coffee with somebody like Randy, like, at a meeting. Somebody comes up to you, spend a few minutes with them. As a fellow, I would absolutely start now or yesterday, like Jane said. Make those connections. They're going to pay off.
Super. That's great. Jane, when are you also, I presume in your position, you're looking at, when you look at hiring staff or fellows are interested in coming on board there at the university, or looking at other locations, a university setting and academics, do you oftentimes, how many people from the university write letters to another university to try to get them in that position? 1, 2, how many should the fellow talk to at your place to get support?
Yeah, so I don't think it's the fellows should be hesitant about cold calling practices. That's never a problem. I think that you should be encouraged. But there's nothing like a personal recommendation. So there's nothing like, you picking up the phone and calling somebody that at another practice or another academic institution to say, this person is really great and they're looking for a job, and consider them. So we do this all the time, and practices do this all the time. So a lot of the job search really is by word of mouth. You kind of know who may be looking, or even if you don't, you can call somebody and call some practice to say, I have this fellow, they want to do this, they want to live over there, and getting them connected. So I do this a lot for the fellows. If I know what they're looking for, they can just tell me what city that they want to live in. And if it's a city that I'm familiar with and I know a lot of the practices there, I'm happy to make a phone call for them just to get them in the door and get started. And the rest is really up to them. But I think as the fellows, for the number of people that they know in their training practices, somebody who knows somebody who's got the job that you want. And so don't be afraid to ask.
That's really helpful. One thing we didn't talk about is contracts, and I think in large part because I think contracts have changed dramatically. Most groups, they have one contract and everyone signs on for the larger groups. But does anyone else have any comments or contracts, non-competes, things of that nature?
Carmela kind of put this at the end of the meeting. We usually do this up front along with all the we used to bring a lawyer in to talk about some of these things too, which is helpful. And I would direct people, Mike Valentine, who is former ACC president, did a great series. I'm not going to remember the name of its podcast that covers things like contracts, just goes through the A's to Z's of contracts and what to do. And it's really great for fellows, and it's timeless. It's out on the internet through ACC. But I don't know if we have time to show it. Carmel, I talked to you about this. The non-competes are kind of a hot topic nationally. ACC, their recent legislative conference, looked at 2 issues. One was scope of practice. So, what does MD do? What does nurse practitioner do? What does PA do? But the other big one was non-competes. And I don't have a lot of data to show, but I thought I might show a couple slides from that Board of Governors meeting where they did some polling nationally on non-competes and just some of the data, because there's a lot of, for the fellows, it's always a question about, are non-competes enforceable? Can you do much about them? And it does turn out non-competes are enforceable, but they're very different state to state. So Kim, I don't know, are you on? Can you share my screen if I show a few things? And is it okay, Carmel, if I just show a few slides?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Steve, you should be able to share your screen, I think.
okay, let's see. Share screen, there we go. So,
While Steve's doing that, I second what he said. Go to the ACC website and look for that podcast by Mike Valentine. There's a series on contracts. It's the ABCs. It is really good.
yeah, and it really does a nice nutshell, right about 20 minutes. Can you see that now? Okay, yeah, and this isn't extensive. This is actually just a subset of slides. There were 50 slides overall. And for those of you who don't know, the ACC, each state has a chapter. The presidents of those chapters also serve a different role. The ACC has a board of governors. So the purpose of every state having a governor is to be the kind of the ears and eyes on the ground in the different states to kind of feedback. So California, New York, Florida, Texas, Minnesota, Iowa, South Dakota, all of them have governors. And Randy was in this capacity at one time. So the board of governors, Joe Marine is a cardiologist who's the head of the board of governors. And this was the topic he chose this year, one of them to look at the restrictive covenants. So I just wanted to cover a few things. I got 5 slides here. Restrictive covenants are really different state to state. There's certainly no one size fits all. Some laws have statutes that don't allow physicians to have, or you cannot have physician non-competes. So South Dakota's outlawed non-competes. California, you can't have non-competes. Colorado, state of Massachusetts. In these states, they don't allow physician non-competes. So in other words, when you leave a practice, there's not a restriction on whether you can practice, you know, in a geographic area that's similar, i.e. if you buy a house, you may not have to sell it because you might find a practice that's close enough to drive to. If you have a restrictive covenant or a non-compete, you may have to move out of a geographic area. So this is just an example of some of the states that say, no, you can't have them. There are states that do by statute allow them, and they may be limited, they may be partial. And so this is a list. You got Florida, Georgia, Idaho, Texas, Wisconsin is one. So these allow them. What it doesn't tell you is the scope of it. So you can see we go all the way from allowing them to not allowing them. And then there are other states, and Minnesota is one that they're allowed and they are enforceable potentially, but it's not a statute. So this is interesting. Of all the governors, so all 50, they polled this, they asked each governor to say, do you have a restricted covenant or non-compete in your contract? And 68%, you can see in the pie chart there, said, yeah, I do. 30% said no. I'm assuming most of this is probably a state division. If you come from a non-compete state, you don't have one. If you come from a compete state, you have one. And then this is interesting. Can you be successful in modifying the restrictive covenants? i.e., can you go to an employer and say, well, I'll work for you, but can you modify my non-compete? And so 46% of the respondents said they could not modify their non-compete. It's kind of a take it or leave it. This is what you get if you work here. I'm not sure how the math worked on this one. 43% it wasn't applicable to them, and 10% said they were able to modify in some way. You know, maybe say we restrict it to a year rather than 2 years of this geographic region. But, you know, half of them said they couldn't really modify. So most people had a non-compete. And then this was what was interesting, and the ACC was getting at. And they've not taken a position; they're just collecting data. Simply a poll ACC put out, where they asked the Board of Governors, should chapters support legislation that would limit or ban non-competes? And 65% strongly agreed that they should support legislation that would limit or ban, or 28% agreed. So overall, 95% agreed or strongly agreed that there should be a limit or ban on the restrictive covenants. So this MedAxiom is a administrative chapter of ACC. That MedAxiom is a group that works in the science of group management. So these would be different people. These aren't necessarily cardiologists. These would be administrators. Some of them could be doctors, but they pose this more to a group of administrators and doctors. What's regarding restricted covenants, what describes your opinion? And here 63% thought it should be used in only limited or specific situations, and 15% said you should never have one. But it just gives you a flavor. There's a little bit different, not quite the 90% don't think we should have them. more of a limited exposure. So, and then 38% of people said in MedAxiom that they would strongly agree, 28% agree with supporting legislation to ban the non-competes. So it's not a position paper from the ACC, it's just a report of the sentiment that's out there. And so I just want to launch that one out there and see what people will think about that. And then we're going to discuss that a little more at our state meeting, but that's the nationwide data to date. And there probably will be a white paper from the ACC coming out on a statement about it. So I don't know if anybody has questions, or Carmelo, I'll ask you, if you have any questions about that.
Non-compete. I was surprised to hear that the ACC is taking this on. It seems like a focus more on the business side rather than the clinical side. I'm not against it. I think that non-competes are really a one-sided advantage for the institution that hires you, not an advantage for the cardiologist, individual cardiologist. It's good for a large group cardiologist if they want to keep their group together. But just starting out, I think the premise behind it was based on patients going with you and following you from one place to another. And in reality, I was just looking for insurance for my son, and here is Health Partners. You can't see a UMP physician, and vice versa. They both, the insurance companies really dictate who you see.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure really the only value behind it. It's not the basic premise behind it is not what it's used for today.
I just want to be clear too, the ACC is not taking a formal position. It's just collecting the information. So it's simply a poll. And actually the paper would show both the pluses and minuses of non-competes. Their goal was just to find out what the members at large are thinking and paint the landscape for a discussion with that. But for fellows, that is something to look at. And we usually get the question, should I have a lawyer read my contract? And then some people say, well, you can't change it. So why? And then, but you should absolutely know what's in it. So, because you will be bound to it. And if you want to contest it, you're still going to have to deal with that. And that's pretty onerous. So you're a fellow with debt, maybe you bought a new house, you're probably not going to, pick a fight with an employer. So just be aware of what the implications would be, because I forget who threw it out, but it's like 50% of people will move jobs in the first couple of years. And if your intent to, try and stay in the same general region, it'll have an impact on you. So.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Steve. And I think the value of this meeting tonight is that we want to have the fellows find a job that they'll stay there for at least 3 to 5 years, something that they invest in locally. Yeah. But with that said, I think reading through the fine details, not just the non-compete of your contract, but you may want to consider looking over the fine details as when could they, if they want to discharge you, how can they discharge you? Why would they discharge you? It may not be your quality. You may be a phenomenal cardiologist, incredibly nice, do everything right. But if they don't got the money, they don't got the money, and you may not have a job. So we'll understand those kind of nuances in the contract. Contracts aren't meant to be mean. They're just meant to protect the person who's writing it. That's their job. I don't know if any disagreements there with the group.
Hey, Carmela, I think from the applicant, the fellow's perspective, it depends on what you're looking for, right? So if I'm coming out and if I want Dr. Chen's track of being a program director at an academic institution, then maybe the non-compete makes no difference to me. Because if it doesn't work out at the University of Minnesota, I'm going to move to a different state. Who cares if they have bind me by a restrictive covenant? So it depends on what you're looking for. If you're, for whatever reason, family, your own personal needs, you need to be in certain city and certain part of the country, well, then a non-compete is going to make a difference. And you better really understand that if this job doesn't work out, what your options are to stay in that location. And the non-compete for the institution, just to play both sides, we all invest a lot in hiring someone. and put a lot of resource and time and training into that person. And you know, sometimes it's protective for our investment for that person not to be able to just fly by and take off in 6 months. And you know, in some practices in some part of the country, it's not very prevalent here in Minnesota, but in some parts of the country, you know, it works like that. So I think these are probably going to all continue to get softer. I think Steve's data that he shared probably reflects a different climate today than it was 10 years ago and 20 years ago, as far as these non-competes. And then the contract itself, I agree. I don't think any of our contracts, anybody on this call certainly has a contract that is not wonderful. But as a person joining the group, the conflict comes when you didn't read it or didn't understand the elements, and then you're surprised, right? So going in with your eyes really wide open, and that's why I encourage everybody to get a lawyer, just to explain it to them. What does this mean?
Yeah.
So that they're not surprised and that there's not, you know, expectation mismatch.
Yeah. The one thing I got to throw in there too is I'll never forget, it was the first day of medical school, and our medical school counselor, Kay Colangelo was her name, got up in front of us and gave us a message I'm not sure we were ready to receive, but she said, I'm going to give you a piece today on your first day of medical school, a piece of advice that I want you to remember forever. Don't buy the big house right out of training. And what she was saying was, don't watch your financial house. Don't get debt laden to a house with a mortgage that if the job doesn't work in 2 years, you leveraged your whole self, you've got payments, maybe the market's down, or buy a couple cars, seen it time after time, and it just makes misery in it. It really can put a big dent in your personal life. So fellows, when you're coming out, watch your expenditures. It's okay to be light for a while and go into a smaller home besides a mansion. There's a difference between wealth and cash flow, and you should know the difference. And also look at a mortgage statement and amortization loan. That's all I'm going to say. Just look at how much you pay into your house. It's almost pure interest at first. So be careful.
So if I could talk on contracts, it depends upon the group you're joining. So if you're going to join a cardiologist with Kaiser Permanente in California, they probably have a fairly steady contract, and your ability to negotiate changes in that contract are probably very, very limited. But if you join a group of 10 cardiologists in North Carolina that run their own shop, that contract is much more fluid, and you have the right to discuss reasonable options. So it's not that you can't look into a contract. You just have to know the entity you're dealing with, because the larger the corporation, the less leeway you're going to have. In terms of non-competes, nobody should sign for a non-compete where they will enforce it regardless. So the only way that you should be enforced on a non-compete is if you leave. If they ask you to leave, or for whatever reason they downsize and you're out, that you need to have your contract say that the non-compete is not enforceable because it wasn't your choosing. And that's a very reasonable thing. Those are the kind of issues that you can talk about that I don't think are red flags for groups that just make common sense. And in terms of a lawyer, absolutely should have a lawyer, but be careful the lawyer you pick. Having been in this position many times, trying to talk to fellows have come back to us about a contract. There have been lawyers who are really good. They understand medical contracts and their questions are reasonable. And then there's the lawyers that are literally trying to prove that they're worth their money, and they're nitpicking about things in the contract, which is just ridiculous. And I try to say that unbiasedly. So I would get a lawyer, absolutely. But if you can get a good reference, I don't know how you find out the right one, but you know, their tactic can be a little difficult at times if they're just out to prove a point. That's my advice.
I would agree with Randy. And to Bill's point, definitely whoever you sign with, unless you're signing with the feds, you know, if you sign with the VA, there's no point getting a contract looked at. It's what the feds write. It's a one-page agreement saying they'll hire you. But any other entity, get a lawyer to look at it. But don't Google best employment lawyer in the country. That's never going to work. It's someone, number one, who is really good at healthcare employment law, and number two, who is really good at that stuff in your state. So if you're going to stay in Minnesota, or if you're from Wisconsin, I know we have some fellows on from Wisconsin, look at local employment laws and look at who's good there. Otherwise, to Randy's point, just like in any other profession, you will find lawyers who are happy to charge you by the hour and point out every single flaw in a contract, because guess what? Every sentence in a contract is a flaw. It is either for or against one of the two parties, and that's just how contracts are. Just be careful that you select someone who is able to represent and look at your interests, but is not just doing it simply to rack up billable hours. I've been in that experience personally, so it is a fact. You got to be as careful choosing a lawyer looking at a contract as choosing a contract.
That's great advice. And one point, don't go to your brother who's an attorney in employment law to review your contract, because he'll most likely tell you what the hell you're complaining about. This is an awesome deal, take it. I can tell personal experience.
Great.
Any other comments before we wrap this up? I thought it was very productive. I hope the fellows got a lot out of it tonight.
Carmelo, I got a panelist that wants to join here. There you go. He's a little late to the game, but he wants to know if he could come in.
I just sleep on the floor snoring.
Will he take calls? Will he see 30 patients a day in clinic, Steve? That's what matters.
All right. Well, I think we're getting close to talking to ourselves, so we should probably.
Yeah. But it was great to talk to all of you. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, Carmelo.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us.